I realized that night that 15 years of marriage could be condensed into the sound of a briefcase clicking shut. It was 7:34 p.m. The kitchen smelled like the lemon herb chicken I had spent an hour preparing, a peace offering for a war I didn't even know it started. Vincent sat across from me, his posture as stiff as the starch in his $300 dress shirt. He didn't look at me. He looked through me, his eyes tracking the steam rising from his plate as if it were a data point on a spreadsheet. "I've spent a lot of time reviewing the trajectory of our lives, Sarah," he said. His voice was devoid of heat. It was the voice he used when he was firing a mid-level manager. And frankly, the ROI just isn't there anymore. That was how he described 15 years of shared beds, a mortgage, and the messy, beautiful reality of raising a son. I felt a coldness start in the marrow of my bones and spread outward. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had typed his invoices, the hands that had rubbed his shoulders after he'd had a hard day at the office building his empire. They were shaking. "I'm filing tomorrow," he continued, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were like flint. "I've already had the papers drawn up. To keep this efficient, I'm taking the house, both cars, and the firm. It's my name on the building, after all. It's only fair I keep the assets I built." I swallowed, my throat feeling like it was lined with broken glass. "And Tyler?" Vincent let out a short, dry puff of air, a laugh that didn't reach his face. "You can keep him. He's 15, Sarah. He's moody, he's expensive, and quite frankly, he doesn't fit the bachelor profile I'm moving toward. Consider it a gift. I'm letting you have him." A gift. My son, the boy who had his father's cowlick and my temper, was being handed over like a leftover meal Vincent was too full to finish. He was graciously letting me have the one thing in this world that actually mattered, while he stripped the skin off everything else. In that moment, something inside of me didn't just break, it crystallized. The warmth of the wife, the partner, the lover, it evaporated. In its place was a jagged, freezing clarity. He thought he was taking my life. He thought he was leaving me with nothing but a moody teenager and the clothes on my back. I looked at the sage green walls of my kitchen, the color I picked because it felt like a hug. I realized I was looking at a crime scene. "Everything?" I managed to whisper, making my voice go small, thin, and fragile. I needed him to see exactly what he expected, a broken woman drowning in his wake. "You want everything?" Vincent stood up, smoothing his tie with a smirk that made my skin crawl. It was the smirk of a man who had already won. "Everything that has value, Sarah. I've earned it. You were just along for the ride." He picked up his leather briefcase and walked toward the door, his expensive Italian loafers clicking rhythmically across the floor. Every click felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of our life together. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. In his mind, I was already a ghost. I sat there in the silence of the kitchen, the lemon herb chicken growing cold and gelatinous on the table. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just reached out and touched the edge of the mahogany table, the table he'd be losing to the bank in 6 months, though he didn't know it yet. He thought he was taking my life. He didn't realize he was actually handing me the keys to his prison. The smell of fresh, cheap gray paint hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of my erasure. 2 days after Vincent's pronouncement, the vultures descended, cloaked in self-righteousness and the reek of my impending irrelevance. First, there was Lorraine, Vincent's mother-in-law, my mother-in-law for 15 years, a woman whose every interaction with me felt like a subtle calibration of my perceived worthlessness. She arrived with a steely glint in her eyes and a stack of industrial-strength garbage bags, not moving boxes, garbage bags. "Vincent says you won't be needing any of the furniture," she announced, her voice as sharp and brittle as a winter branch. She marched straight into my bedroom, the sacred space where Vincent and I started our family, and began pulling my clothes from the closet. The soft cashmere sweater Vincent had given me for our 10th anniversary, the silk scarf I'd bought on our honeymoon, all tossed unceremoniously into black plastic. "No jewelry either, dear," she added, her eyes lingering on the modest pearl earrings I wore. "Vincent considers those marital assets that he worked for." I stood there, paralyzed, watching my life being reduced to refuse. Each rustle of plastic, each condescending tut from Lorraine chipped away at the last vestiges of my dignity. She rifled through my dresser drawers, her bony fingers invading my most private spaces, as if searching for some hidden hoard I might have squirreled away. The casual brutality of it was staggering. This wasn't just an eviction, it was an act of psychological warfare designed to break me down to nothing. Then came Brittany. She was 27, a marketing assistant at Vincent's firm, with a perennially surprised expression and a smile that seemed permanently plastered on her face. She arrived not as a visitor, but as an inheritor. She moved into my home immediately, not bothering to wait for me to fully vacate. Her first act was to repaint my carefully chosen sage green kitchen. The sage green. I had spent weeks agonizing over that shade, a tranquil color that reminded me of resilience, of growth. It had been the heart of our home, a place where Tyler and I had shared countless breakfasts, where I'd celebrated Vincent's early business victories. Now, Brittany, with a can of paint labeled Builder Grade Gray, was systematically obliterating it. "Oh, it just feels so much more modern, don't you think, Lorraine?" Brittany cooed, paintbrush in hand, a smudge of gray on her cheek that she wore like a badge of honor. She cast a glance at me, a flicker of triumph in her eyes, barely veiled by a saccharine smile. The green was a bit dated. Just like me. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the kitchen, normally so unobtrusive, now felt like a buzzing accusation. The smell of cheap paint was thick and cloying, replacing the familiar sense of coffee and home. My carefully chosen curtains, still hanging by the window, suddenly looked absurd and out of place against the rapidly drying gray. Lorraine, ever the efficient accomplice, stacked the last of my garbage bags by the front door. "There you go, dear. Everything you'll need." She patted one of the bulging bags, a gesture of faux kindness that made my stomach churn. "Don't forget your personal items." I looked at the piled bags, then at Brittany, who was now leaning against the freshly painted gray wall, sipping from my ceramic mug, her gaze wandering around the kitchen as if mentally redecorating every corner. She was so brazen, so confident in her victory. She had moved into my life, my home, my husband, without a single shred of remorse. My vision blurred for a moment, not with tears, but with a sudden, intense surge of adrenaline. They thought they were humiliating me. They thought they were stripping me bare. But as I walked past Brittany, ignoring her saccharine smile, a single thought burned through the coldness in my chest. I watched Brittany smile at my husband, unaware that she was moving into a burning building. Diane had been my maid of honor, the woman who held my hair back when I was morning sick with Tyler, and the one I called when my father passed away. But as I sat across from her at our usual corner table at Lumiere, I realized she wasn't my best friend anymore. Now she was just a line of code in Vincent's surveillance network. "Oh, Sarah, you look like you've been through it," Diane said, her voice dripping with a sympathy that felt as oily as the dressing on her overpriced kale salad. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. I didn't pull away. I let her feel the tremor I intentionally leaned into. "I don't know what to do, Diane," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I'd watched her through the veil of my eyelashes. She wasn't looking at me with comfort. She was scanning me for data. Her eyes darted to my lack of wedding ring, then to the cheap, frayed handbag I'd purposely brought out of storage. "It's just so unfair," Diane cooed, but her thumb was busy under the table. I heard the faint, tactile click, click, click of a smartphone screen. She was texting, probably a play-by-play to Vincent. "She's a mess, totally defeated, no fight left in her." "You know," Diane continued, her tone shifting to that faux casual advice voice, "maybe you should just sign whatever he wants, Sarah. Why drag it out? It's only going to hurt Tyler to see you two fighting in court. If you just concede, maybe Vincent will be generous later." Generous. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. I looked at Diane, really looked at her. I noticed the new designer watch on her wrist, a model Vincent's firm had just done a massive campaign for. I noticed how she checked the time every 5 minutes, as if she were on a schedule. She wasn't just spying for him, she was auditioning for my vacancy. She hoped that by helping him clean up the mess of his marriage, she'd be the one he turned to once the gray paint novelty of Brittany wore off. "You're probably right," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. I squeezed her hand back, feeling the cold metal of her new watch against my skin. I'm so tired of fighting. I'll tell my lawyer to stop the audit. It's too expensive anyway, and I have no money left." The flash of triumph in Diane's eyes was instantaneous. It was a predatory spark, a flicker of, "I got it," that she couldn't quite hide behind her Botoxed forehead. She thought she had just. The air in my new apartment didn't smell like paint or expensive coffee. It smelled like peace. It had been 3 months since the gavel fell, 3 months since the sterling empire had been exposed as a hollow shell. My life was smaller now, contained within 4 walls that I had decorated with things I actually liked, not things that projected success. There was a stack of books on the nightstand I actually had time to read, and the kitchen was a warm, messy yellow. Tyler was in the living room, the low blue light of his laptop illuminating a face that finally looked relaxed. We didn't talk about the debt or the secret apartment. We didn't have to. He had seen the way his father looked at him like an expense report, and he had seen the way I had fought to keep our heads above water. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable. I knew the rhythm of that knock. It used to make my heart race with anxiety, wondering if he was angry, wondering if I'd balanced the books well enough to keep him happy. Now it just felt like a dull thud from a distant past. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Vincent looked like a caricature of his former self. The Armani suit was gone, replaced by an off-the-rack jacket that was slightly too big for him. His hair, usually slicked into a weapon of vanity, was thinning and gray at the temples. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had spent 90 days realizing that everything is a heavy burden when you have to carry it alone. I opened the door, but I didn't step back to let him in. I stood in the threshold, a physical barrier between my new peace and his old chaos. "Sarah," he said. His voice was cracked, stripped of the booming authority it once carried. I've been trying to reach Nina. The banks, they're taking the house next week. The deficiency judgment it's more than I can handle. I thought maybe we could figure something out, for Tyler's sake." I looked at him, and for a fleeting second, I looked for the spark, the anger, or the pity, but there was nothing, just a profound, hollow indifference. "For Tyler's sake?" I repeated softly. I glanced back at my son, who hadn't even looked up from his homework. "He's doing fine. He has a trust fund you can't touch, and a mother who doesn't have to lie for you anymore." "Sarah, please," he whispered. His eyes darted towards the warmth of my living room. "I made a mistake. I was stressed. I didn't realize the debt was that bad. You were the one who handled the numbers. You should have told me." The audacity of it was almost poetic. Even at the bottom of the pit, he was still trying to find a way to make it my fault. He wanted me to be his bookkeeper one last time. He wanted me to fix the math of his life. "You signed the waiver, Vincent. You told me to go find a nice, small life and leave the big moves to you. Well, I found it. And as for the debt, you got exactly what you asked for. You wanted the house, the business, and the cars. You wanted everything. Now, you own it. All of it." "I have nowhere to go," he said, a single tear escape his eye, a performance I'd seen 1,000 times before. "That sounds like a business transaction you'll have to manage on your own," I replied. I walked back into the kitchen and turned off the kettle. The apartment was quiet again. No screaming, no gaslighting, no hovering clouds of financial ruin, just the sound of Tyler turning a page and the rain against the glass. Vincent stayed in the hallway for a long time.
I could hear his heavy footsteps pacing back and forth, then the sound of the elevator arriving to take him back down to the world he had built for himself. I didn't check the peephole to see him leave. I closed the door, locked it, and for the first time in 15 years, I didn't care what happened on the other side.